When I saw those words on social media, birthday celebration for my father-in-law, the dad I always wanted to have, I felt my heart crack like parched earth during a drought. 30 years of sacrifice for a son who now publicly denied me. My name is George Miller, I'm 72 years old, and until 5 months ago I was the owner of a pharmacy chain that I built with the sweat of my brow and the strength of my arms. I was born in Millerville, a small town in rural Kentucky, but I built my life in Nashville, where I raised my family and established my business. I started selling medicines door to door, carrying a heavy case that left me with back problems I still have today, but I never complained. Work dignifies a man, as my late father used to say. I spent my life saving every penny, sleeping just 4-5 hours a night to give my son what I never had. I gave up vacations and comforts. I wore patched clothes while my son wore brand-name sneakers. I paid for private college, an apartment, a car, everything so my only son would have better opportunities in life. I even sacrificed time with my dear wife, Martha, who often ate dinner alone while I closed the register at the last pharmacy. And when she passed away 8 years ago, I continued working, saving, building for him, only for him. Before continuing this story, I'd like to thank the Grandpa's Voice channel for the opportunity to share my story. And I ask you who are watching to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, comment where you're watching from and what time it is there. Every day there's a new story here from people like me who have much to share with you younger folks. But getting back to what matters, I never imagined that all that sacrifice would end that way, with my own flesh and blood trading me for another. It was like taking a bullet in the back, but I guarantee the response I gave changed everything. I was born in 1953 in a simple wooden house with a dirt floor in rural Kentucky. My father, Gerald, worked the fields growing tobacco and raising some chickens for sustenance. My mother, June, sewed for others and made homemade bread to sell in the neighborhood. We were poor but honorable. From childhood, I learned the value of work. By age 9, I was already helping with the harvest and delivering the bread my mother made, walking miles on those dirt roads. I studied until the 4th grade in a rural schoolhouse, one room with students of all ages. The teacher, Miss Matilda, said I had potential, but in those days, a poor man's son didn't have many choices. At 14, I went to work as a helper in a pharmacy in Danville, a slightly larger town near home. That's where I discovered my calling. The pharmacy owner, Mr. Arthur, was a man of few words but great knowledge. He taught me everything about medications, ointments, tinctures. In those days, the pharmacist was almost a doctor for the poorest folks. I saw people arriving with injuries, fevers, pains, and leaving better, with hope in their eyes. That touched me deeply. I worked there for 7 years, learning every detail of that trade. At 21, I gathered my savings and came to Nashville. The big city scared me at first. So many people, so much noise, such hurry. But I had a dream and determination. I started working in a large pharmacy downtown, one of those old ones with a marble counter and wooden shelves up to the ceiling. I worked from dawn to dusk, learned about new medications, took night courses, slept little. In 5 years, I saved enough money to open my first small pharmacy in an outlying neighborhood. It was during this time that I met Martha, my late wife, as beautiful as a sunrise over the Kentucky hills, black hair and honey-colored eyes. She worked at a bakery near my pharmacy and always came to buy aspirin for her mother. We married in 1979 in a simple ceremony full of hope. She believed in me when I said we'd have a good life someday. She believed so much that she started working with me at the pharmacy, handling the accounts while I attended to customers. In 1982, our only son was born. It was the happiest day of my life. I held that little baby in my arms and promised he would never go through the hardships I went through, that he would have education, comfort, opportunities. I named him Richard in honor of my paternal grandfather, the only one in the family who could read and write. From that day on, I worked even harder. I opened the second pharmacy 3 years later, then the third. I was constantly running from one to another, checking inventory, training employees, negotiating with suppliers. Martha complained that I wasn't seeing our son grow up, and it was true. I missed many important moments, his first tooth, his first steps, his school parties. But I always told her, "It's for him, honey. All of this is for his future." And I kept working. On the rare days off I had, I took Richard fishing at Old Hickory Lake or to see my hometown. I wanted him to understand where we came from, but I don't think he ever really understood. The sacrifices were many. While other fathers had time to play ball with their sons, I was counting medicines or doing inventory. While other couples went out to dinner, Martha and I were calculating how much we could invest in the next pharmacy. We never had real vacations, never traveled abroad like Richard's school friends did. Every cent was reinvested in the business or saved for his future. When Richard turned 18, we already had a chain of 7 pharmacies. I sent him to study pharmacy at the best private university in Nashville. I wanted him to take over the business someday, with technical knowledge, not just practical experience like me. I bought him an apartment near the university and a new car, so he wouldn't have to depend on buses. I paid all his expenses. Just focus on studying, I would say, and he did study. I can't deny that. He graduated with good grades and started working with me. At first he seemed interested, learned quickly, but soon I realized he had other plans. He wanted to modernize everything, invest in marketing, open stores in malls. Good ideas, I don't deny it, but ideas that required a lot of money. Money that I had, it's true, but that I saved with such sacrifice that it hurt to spend without certainty of return. That's when the first disagreements began. Richard thought I was old-fashioned, resistant to change. I thought he didn't value what had been built with so much sweat. The arguments became more frequent, especially after he met Patricia, his current wife, a beautiful, intelligent woman from a wealthy family, with a business degree, full of modern ideas like him. Her father, Dr. Edward Johnson, owns a large construction company here in Nashville, an educated man with degrees from abroad, the kind who talks about trips to Europe as casually as going to the corner store. I soon noticed that Richard began to be impressed by that world, comparing my simple country ways with his father-in-law's refinement, thinking my way of doing business was outdated. In 2017, Martha died from cancer that took her in 6 months. It was the hardest blow of my life. It was just Richard and me left. I thought the loss would bring us closer, but it was the opposite. He and Patricia began to distance themselves more and more. They visited me less and less. When he came to the business, it was only to criticize. "Dad, you need to computerize this. Dad, this advertising is outdated. Dad, Edward does it this way and it works really well." Always his father-in-law as the example. At first, I even tried to adapt. I hired an IT company, renovated some stores, tried to keep up with his ideas, but deep down I felt I was losing my son, that he was becoming more distant, not just from the pharmacies, but from me too. The distance between my son Richard and me happened gradually, like water wearing away stone. At first, it was small things. Him cancelling Sunday lunches, not showing up at family gatherings, always with excuses that he was busy with his father-in-law's business or some Nashville high society event. I swallowed hard and pretended it didn't matter, but inside a hole was forming. After Martha passed, I was alone in that big house we built together in the Green Hills neighborhood. I had the pharmacies to keep me busy, of course, but at 67 I no longer had the same energy as before. I hired a general manager to handle the operational part and began to think about succession. After all that wealth I built was for Richard. It always was. One afternoon in June 2023, I called him for a talk. I prepared a barbecue the way he liked since he was little. I bought that craft beer he learned to like from his father-in-law. I arranged everything carefully, as if it were a special date, and it was, at least for me. I wanted to officially pass the command of the pharmacies to him, make a retirement plan, organize the transfer of assets. He arrived 2 hours late, apologizing, saying he had an important meeting with Dr. Edward about an expansion project for the construction company. He didn't bring Patricia, said she had plans with friends. We sat on the porch, drank beer, ate the meat, talked about trivialities, about the weather, about football. When I finally got up the courage to broach the subject, he checked his watch. "Dad, sorry, but I have to get going. Edward is waiting for us for dinner at their house. He has some contacts from Washington who'll be there. It could be important for the future. It was like a slap in the face. There I was wanting to plan his future, and he was rushing off to dinner at his father-in-law's house. I took a deep breath, as I'd learned to do after so many years dealing with difficult customers. "Richard, I wanted to discuss something important about the future of the pharmacies, about my retirement." He gave an awkward smile, looked at his watch again. "Dad, we can talk about this another day, or send it by email, I don't know. You know I've been somewhat removed from the pharmacies, right? I'm helping Edward expand the construction company to the northeast. I don't know if I'll have time to take on more responsibilities for now." I stood still, holding my fork in the air. "You're not interested in the pharmacies I built my entire life thinking of you?" He shrugged, as if we were talking about an old bicycle, not the work of a lifetime. "Look, Dad, all that needs major modernization. The business model is outdated. If you really want to know, I think it would be better to sell everything to a big chain and invest the money in something more contemporary. Edward has some contacts who—" I didn't let him finish. "Everything is about Edward now, isn't it? Edward this, Edward that, and what about me and everything I built?" I saw a flash of irritation in his eyes. "Dad, you're being unfair. Edward has taught me a lot about the modern business world, things that you, with all due respect, never had access to. He studied at Yale, Dad." "Yale? So what? I didn't need Yale to build a multi-million-dollar business from nothing." "From nothing, Richard. Edward was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, inherited the construction company from his father. It's easy to be successful that way." He stood up, visibly irritated. "See? This is why we can't talk. You don't accept that there are other ways of doing things. You're stuck in this story of, I came from nothing, I struggled so much. Fine, Dad. I respect your story, but the world has changed. I got up too, feeling the blood boiling in my veins. You think it's easy, don't you? That everything you have fell from the sky, the education, the apartment, the car. I worked day and night to give you what I never had. And I'm grateful, Dad, but I can't live forever in the shadow of your story of overcoming hardship. I have my own plans, my own life." He grabbed his car keys, shaking his head. "I'm not going to argue with you in this state. We'll talk when you're calmer." And he left, leaving me alone with the grill still burning and a heavy heart. 2 weeks passed with no news from him. I called several times, but it always went to voicemail. I sent messages, got short replies. "I'm busy, I'll call you later. I'm traveling with Edward." It was as if a chasm had opened between us, until one Sunday morning I was sipping my coffee on the porch, browsing through the newspaper, when I saw a notification on my phone. Richard had tagged me in a post. I thought, finally he remembered he has a father. I opened it anxiously, thinking it might be an attempt at reconciliation. What I saw left me breathless. It was a photo of Richard hugging Dr. Edward, both smiling, with champagne glasses in hand, and the caption in large letters, "Birthday celebration for my father-in-law, the dad I always wanted to have." I read that once, twice, 3 times. I couldn't believe it. My son, my only son, denying everything I did for him, publicly replacing me with another man. A man who never changed one of his diapers, who never stayed up all night when he had a fever, who never gave up anything for him. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and humiliation that I had never experienced before. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the phone. Without thinking much, I wrote in the comments, "Glad you found a father because I've taken your name out of my $5 million will." I posted it and turned off the phone. I didn't want to see the reaction, not at that moment. I spent the day walking around the house like a ghost, going through memories, looking at old photos, trying to understand where I had gone wrong. Did I work too much, give too little attention, demand too much? Or was it simply that Dr. Edward's money and status were more attractive than my simple country ways? The house phone rang several times, but I didn't answer. The next day, my cell phone had dozens of missed calls and messages. From Richard, from Patricia, even from Dr. Edward. I didn't open any of them. I needed to think, organize my feelings, decide what to do. That Monday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I personally went to all my pharmacies. I talked with the employees, many of whom had been with me for decades. Simple, hard-working people who respected me, not for what I had, but for who I was. That gave me strength. At night, I finally turned on my phone. Among the many messages, there was one from Richard that said, "Dad, we need to talk. That was a misunderstanding. It wasn't what it seemed." I replied dryly, "Come to the house tomorrow at 10 a.m. Come alone." He arrived punctually, which was rare. He looked worn out, with dark circles under his eyes. I opened the door and invited him in without hugs or pats on the back, as we used to do. "Are you serious about the will?" was the first thing he asked, still in the entryway. I felt a pang in my chest. No, how are you? No apology, just concern about the money. "Sit down, Richard, we need to talk." We went to the living room. He sat tensely on the edge of the couch as if ready to run out. I settled into my favorite armchair, the one Martha gave me on our 25th anniversary. "What was that post, Richard? Explain it to me." He ran his hand through his hair, nervous. "It was silly, Dad. We were celebrating Edward's birthday. Everyone was a bit tipsy from champagne. Patricia asked me to post something nice. It was without thinking." Without thinking. The dad I always wanted to have. "That doesn't come from nowhere, son." He looked away. "You're reading too much into it." "It was just a compliment to Edward. It wasn't meant to diminish you." "How not? You practically said he's a better father than me, that I wasn't enough." Richard sighed, seeming irritated. "See? It's always this. You turn everything into a drama. It was just a silly social media post. Nobody takes that seriously." "I do, Richard, because behind that silly post are years of you pulling away, treating me like an outdated country bumpkin, running to Edward as if he were the source of all wisdom." "Are you jealous, is that it? You're jealous because I admire Edward, because he can offer me opportunities that you can't." That hurt more than a punch to the stomach. "Opportunities? And what do you think I tried to give you your entire life? I worked like a condemned man to give you education, comfort, a future. I offered you a prosperous business, a solid legacy. Doesn't that count?" He got up, pacing around the room. "It counts, Dad. Of course it counts, but you don't understand. The world has changed. I want more. I want to expand horizons. Edward introduced me to important people. He showed me possibilities that you, with all due respect, don't even dream exist. And for that I'm no longer enough. For that, you need another father." He stopped, staring at me. "Are you really serious about the will? You're going to disinherit me because of a silly thing on social media?" It was my turn to stand up. I felt a determination I hadn't felt in a long time. "It's not because of the post, Richard. It's because of everything. It's because of your ingratitude, the way you've been treating me in recent years, as if I were a nuisance, an ignorant hick who's only good for bankrolling your luxuries. That's not fair, Dad. Fair? You want to talk about fairness? Is it fair that I gave everything for you and get discarded like this? Is it fair for you to prefer someone else's father over your own? Is it fair that you only care about my money, not about me?" He was silent for a few seconds, then spoke in a more conciliatory tone. "Look, Dad, let's forget all this. I'll delete the post, apologize publicly, whatever you want. Let's go back to normal." "Normal? What normal, Richard? You ignoring my calls, cancelling our lunches, treating me like an idiot who doesn't understand modern business." "I promise I'll change, Dad. I'll dedicate more time to the pharmacies. I raised my hand, interrupting him. "Now, right? Now that I mentioned the will, you're suddenly interested in the pharmacies again." He blushed, visibly embarrassed. "It's not that, Dad. It's enough, Richard. I've made my decision. I'm going to reorganize my business and my will. I need time to think about what I'll do with everything I built, since you clearly don't value it." "Dad, please, don't do this. It's my entire inheritance, my future." "Your future? I thought your future was with Dr. Edward, the father you always wanted to have." He went silent, his face a mask of shock and anger. After a few seconds, he grabbed his car keys and left, slamming the door. That night, I discovered he had deleted the post. Too late. The damage was already done. The words couldn't be taken back, and anyway I had already seen what was really in his heart. The post was just confirmation of something I had suspected for years. My son saw me as a bank, not as a father. In the following days, Richard tried everything. He sent flowers, gifts, long messages apologizing. Patricia called me crying, saying it was she who suggested the caption for the post, that she never imagined I would be hurt. Even Dr. Edward tried to contact me, leaving polite messages on my answering machine, saying it was all a misunderstanding. But something inside me had changed. The pain of betrayal had given way to a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was as if I could finally see the situation clearly. I had raised a spoiled son who didn't value my sacrifice, who was with me only for what I could give him materially, and that needed to change. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I really was going to modify my will, not out of revenge or anger, but to teach my son a lesson I should have taught a long time ago. The lesson that in life nothing comes for free, that respect and gratitude are fundamental values, that a man's character is worth more than all the money in the world. The decision to change my will wasn't made in the heat of the moment. After the argument with Richard, I spent 2 weeks reflecting deeply on what to do. I consulted my old friend Oliver, a lawyer who had been with me since the opening of the first pharmacy. I explained the situation, showed him the post that I had saved as a screenshot, told him about the years of distance. Oliver listened carefully, as he always did. When I finished, he adjusted his glasses on his nose and spoke with the wisdom of someone who has seen much of life. "George, I know many cases of children who only value their parents when they're gone, and then it's too late. Sometimes a reality check while you're alive might be the greatest inheritance you leave for Richard." His words resonated with me for days. A reality check. That was exactly what my son needed. Not just removing his name from the will, but showing him that the life he so admired in his father-in-law, the travels, the contacts, the business, all of it required work, dedication, and integrity, things he seemed to have forgotten in his dazzlement with Dr. Edward's world. Then I remembered something I had kept for years in my personal safe, a diary I started writing when I opened the first pharmacy. There I recorded not just numbers and balances, but my dreams, my difficulties, the small victories of each day. I continued writing even after the business grew, documenting every important decision, every sacrifice made for the family. This diary was more than a business record. It was the stories of my life, of the building of our wealth. It detailed how I saved every penny, how many nights I spent awake worried about debts, how many leisure opportunities I declined to invest in the future, a future that in my mind always had Richard's face. I reread those yellowed pages, some stained with coffee, others with the trembling handwriting of someone who wrote exhausted. Everything was there. The time I sold the family's only car to buy an emergency stock of medicines. The Christmas we spent with a simple dinner, because all the money had gone to renovating the second pharmacy. The advantageous partnership proposal I refused because the partner wanted unethical practices. But it wasn't just that. The diary also had pages dedicated to Richard, his first steps, his school achievements, my pride when he got into college, when he graduated, and my concerns too. The times I saw him spending too much, devaluing money, taking comfort for granted, that diary was my true inheritance for him. Not the money, not the pharmacies, but the life lessons, the understanding of the value of honest work. I called Oliver again and explained my plan. He listened carefully, made some legal suggestions, and in the end, nodded with approval. "It's fair, George, and it might be exactly what he needs." The same week, I sought out Mrs. Zoe, a lady who had worked at my first pharmacy since its opening. She knew Richard since he was a baby, saw him grow up, often took care of him when Martha needed to help me in the store. Zoe was like family, one of those people whose loyalty can't be bought with money. "Mrs. Zoe, I need your help with a delicate matter." I explained the situation and what I intended to do. She listened to everything with those wise eyes that seemed to see beyond the words. "Mr. George, you were more than a boss to me. You were the one who paid for my Harry's treatment when nobody gave him a chance. You were the one who guaranteed education for my grandchildren. You can count on me for whatever you need." I also sought out Ted, my accountant for more than 2 decades, a discreet, efficient man who knew every number of my business. He would be fundamental for the financial part of my plan. Ted, I want a complete audit of the pharmacies. Every penny that came in and went out in the last 5 years. I want detailed reports on profitability, future projections, real valuation of the assets. He looked at me surprised. Any problem, Mr. George? No, Ted. I'm just reorganizing things, ensuring everything is in order. In the following weeks, while my plan took shape, Richard continued his attempts to reconcile. He sent daily messages, showed up unexpectedly at my house with gifts. He invited me to lunches and dinners. I noticed he was nervous, anxious. The mention of the will had had an effect. During one of these visits, he brought Patricia along. The two sat on my couch, tense like defendants in court. Dad, Richard began, we came in person to apologize. That post was a stupidity, a mistake that won't happen again. Patricia, with tears in her eyes, added, Mr. George, it was a terrible insensitivity on our part. You're a wonderful father-in-law, and Richard loves you very much. That was just a momentary foolishness. I looked at the two calmly. I accept your apologies, but that doesn't change what I discovered through all this. What did you discover? Richard asked apprehensively. That you only value what I built, not who I am or what I can teach. That you see me as a bank, not as a father or father-in-law. That's not true, Dad, Richard protested. No? Then why only after I mentioned the will did you start seeking me out with such insistence? Before that, you barely answered my calls. The two were silent, embarrassed. But it's okay, I continued. This made me think a lot about the future, about what I want to leave as a legacy, and I've made some decisions. Richard leaned forward, anxious. What decisions, Dad? First, I'm going to retire. It was time. I'm going to pass the command of the pharmacies to professional managers. I've already talked with Ted and Oliver. Everything is underway. And what about me? You had said I would take over the business someday. You yourself said you weren't interested, that the pharmacies were outdated, remember? That it would be better to sell everything. He swallowed hard. I wasn't thinking straight, Dad. Of course I'm interested. It's our family business. Now you're interested. How interesting. I paused, observing his discomfort. Well, as for the will, I've made my decision. His face went pale. And what is it? You'll find out at the right time. For now, I can only say that I'm reorganizing everything to ensure my legacy is preserved in the right way. But Dad, I'm your only son, your natural heir. Being an heir is not just a matter of blood, Richard. It's also a matter of deserving. They left my house that day, visibly worried. In the following weeks, I noticed a change in Richard's behavior. He began to appear at the pharmacies, to talk with the old employees, to take an interest in the business numbers. He called daily, asking about my health. He even started inviting me to family events at his house, something he hadn't done in years. I observed everything with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Would it be a genuine change, or just concern about the inheritance? Finally, 3 months after the post-incident, I scheduled a formal meeting. I asked Richard to come to Oliver's office, my lawyer. He arrived punctually, dressed formally with a folder in hand. Dad, before we begin, I want to show you something. He opened the folder and took out some papers. These are projects I developed to modernize the pharmacies. I thought of everything. Digital marketing, delivery, health insurance partnerships. I can make it work. I know I can. I looked at the papers without much enthusiasm. Richard, that's not why I called you here today. Oliver entered the room at that moment, greeted both of us, and sat behind his desk. We're ready, Mr. George. I nodded. We are. Oliver opened a folder and removed some documents. Richard, your father asked me to prepare an alteration to his will. He also wants to make some modifications to the administration of the pharmacies. Richard clenched his fists on his lap, tense. First, continued Oliver, Mr. George has decided to create a foundation that will receive 40% of all his assets. This foundation will aim to offer free treatment to low-income seniors, providing medications and medical assistance. Richard's eyes widened. 40%, Dad, that's... I raised my hand, asking for silence. Let Oliver finish. Another 20% will be divided among long-time pharmacy employees, those who have been with him for more than 10 years. Each will receive a percentage proportional to their time of service. Richard was pale now. And the other 40%? Oliver looked at me, asking permission to continue. I nodded. The remaining 40%, including 3 of the 7 pharmacies, will go to you, Richard, with one condition. What condition? He asked weakly. It was my turn to speak. That you work in the pharmacies for at least 3 years before inheriting anything, not as an owner, but as a regular employee, starting from the basics, serving customers, organizing inventory, making deliveries, exactly as I started. He looked at me in disbelief. You're joking, right? I've never been more serious in my life. I want you to understand what it's like to build something from scratch with honest work. I want you to know each employee by name, to feel the tiredness at the end of the day, to see the sparkle in a customer's eyes when they receive good service. But what about Edward's construction company? I have an important position there. I can't just drop everything. The choice is yours, son. Edward or me. The easy inheritance or the hard learning, you decide. He was silent for several minutes, processing it all. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. And if I refuse? Then your 40% will also go to the foundation, and you'll follow your path with Dr. Edward, the father you always wanted to have. Richard stood up and walked to the window, looking outside. His shoulders were tense, his breathing heavy. When he turned around, there was something different in his eyes. Are you testing me? I'm teaching you something I should have done a long time ago. He ran his hand through his hair, in a gesture that reminded me so much of Martha that I felt a tightness in my chest. Can I think about this? Talk to Patricia. Of course, you have a week to decide. When he left the office, Oliver looked at me with a thoughtful expression. Do you think he'll accept, George? I shrugged. I don't know. But if he accepts, it will be the first step to recovering not just a son, but a real man. Exactly 1 week later, Richard appeared at my house. He was different, hair cut shorter, without the expensive watch Dr. Edward had given him, wearing a simple shirt instead of the expensive suits he used to wear. I accept, Dad. I'll work at the pharmacies, starting from zero, as you asked. I felt an emotion I hadn't expected. Are you sure? What about Edward? He gave a sad smile. Let's just say that when I told him about your proposal, he showed his true colors. He said I would be an idiot to trade an executive position for a counter-clerk job, that I would be throwing my future in the trash. And what do you think? I think I finally understood something you tried to teach me my whole life, that a man's true value isn't in the position he holds, but in the character he demonstrates. Edward never cared about me, only about what I could do for him, about the contacts I brought. I nodded, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. Sad that he had to learn this the hard way, relieved that he had finally understood. And Patricia, what did she think? Surprisingly, she supported me. She said she had noticed for a long time how her father treated her like a trophy, not like a daughter, how he only cared about appearances. She's fine. She's pregnant, Dad. You're going to be a grandfather. The news hit me like a ray of light after a long storm. A grandchild, the continuation of the family, a new chance. When did she find out? 2 weeks ago. We were waiting for the right moment to tell you, and now seemed perfect. I stood up and for the first time in months hugged my son. A tight hug, the kind that says more than 1,000 words. The following week, Richard started working at the oldest pharmacy in the chain, the one in the distant neighborhood where it all began. He arrived early, wore the white coat, served customers with patience. At first, his discomfort was visible, the lack of practice, the wounded pride when someone who knew him from high society saw him behind the counter. But gradually, something changed. He began to know the customers by name, to understand their needs, to feel the satisfaction of a job well done. In the first months, I went to the pharmacy almost daily. I observed from a distance, talked with the other employees about his performance. Mrs. Zoe, who supervised his work, told me one afternoon, Mr. George, the boy is changing. At first he complained about everything. Now he arrives smiling, asks how our weekend was, genuinely cares. And it wasn't just at work. Richard and Patricia began to visit me regularly. On Sundays he himself prepared the barbecue, like in the old days. We talked about the pharmacies, about the baby to come, about plans for the future, plans that now included the whole family, not just individual ambition. As for Dr. Edward, I heard he was furious with Richard's decision. He tried to pressure him, then threaten him, finally cut ties. Patricia suffered with the estrangement from her father, but remained firm by her husband's side. "He'll come back when the baby is born," she would say hopefully. "A father is a father, no matter how stubborn." Words that echoed in me in a way she couldn't imagine. 6 months passed since Richard started working at the pharmacies. During this period, I saw my son mature more than in all the previous years. I saw calluses form on those hands that previously only knew the computer keyboard and the steering wheel of imported cars. I saw his face burn from the sun during home deliveries. I saw the tiredness at the end of the day, but also the satisfaction. One afternoon I was sitting on my porch contemplating the sunset when Richard appeared unexpectedly. He sat down beside me, accepted the coffee I offered, and we remained in silence for a few minutes, just appreciating the moment. "You know, Dad," he finally began, "these months working at the pharmacy have taught me more than all the years in college or with Edward." I looked at him with interest. "What have you learned?" "I learned that every penny has value, that serving an old lady well who needs medicine and has little money is worth more than closing $1 million contract. I learned to respect those who work, who wake up early, who make an effort." I took a sip of coffee, letting him continue. "But mainly, Dad, I learned to truly admire you. Not for your money, not for what you built, but for how you built it. For how many Mrs. Marys and Mr. Joes you helped over the years. For how many lives you touched." I felt my eyes water, but maintained my composure. "An old man crying is an ugly thing," as my father used to say. "Mrs. Zoe told me how you helped her son get off drugs. Mr. Anthony told me about the loan you made to him when his house caught fire. Mrs. Selena about the expensive medicine you gave for free when her husband was dying." I shrugged. "I didn't do anything special, just what any decent person would do." "No, Dad. You did what few would do, and I had never realized that. I was too busy chasing status, recognition, easy money." We were silent again. The sun had already set, and the first stars began to appear in the sky. "I wanted to ask you something, Dad." "What is it?" "I wanted you to come with me tomorrow to the ultrasound. We're going to find out if it's a boy or a girl." I felt a lump in my throat. "Of course I'll go, son. I wouldn't miss it for anything." The next day, there I was at the clinic, sitting next to Richard and Patricia, seeing that blob on the screen that was my grandson or granddaughter, when the doctor said, "It's a girl." I saw tears in my son's eyes, the same tears I shed when he was born so many years ago. "Have you thought of a name?" I asked, trying to disguise the emotion. Richard and Patricia exchanged a knowing look before answering. "If you agree, we want to call her Martha in honor of Grandma." It was too much for me. The tears came stubborn and uncontrollable. My Martha, who didn't live to see this moment, would be so happy, so proud. That night, alone at home, I took the old diary again. On the last blank pages, I began to write the recent story. The fight, the reconciliation, the news of the granddaughter. I wrote about Richard's learning, about my own journey of discoveries, about how sometimes you need to lose something to understand its true value. When little Martha was born on a sunny April morning in 2025, Richard had been working at the pharmacies for almost a year. He was no longer the same man. He had broader shoulders, a firmer handshake, a more confident look, and, most importantly, a more generous heart. At the hospital, while holding that tiny bundle of life in his arms, he told me something I will keep forever. "Dad, now I understand. I understand why you did everything you did. I understand the sacrifice, the concern, the unconditional love. And I promise I'll give Martha everything you gave me. Not the money, not the possessions, but the values, the example, the strength." 2 weeks after the birth, to our surprise, Dr. Edward showed up at the house. He was visibly embarrassed, holding a gift wrapped in pink paper. Patricia received him with tears in her eyes, Richard with caution. "I, with respect, came to meet my granddaughter," he said simply. That afternoon I saw something I never imagined, Dr. Edward, always so formal and distant, cradling little Martha with tenderness, in his eyes the same emotion I felt. In the end, we were just two silly old men, melted by a little creature who barely knew we existed. Before leaving, Edward called me aside. "George, I want to apologize to you. I was arrogant and presumptuous. I thought I could buy your son's respect with contacts and opportunities, but you won something much more valuable, his love and admiration. And all my money can't buy that." I shook his hand firmly. "You don't have to apologize, Edward. We're just two fathers trying to do our best for our children, each in our own way." He nodded, emotional. "Can we try again for them, for little Martha?" "Of course we can. Family is family, with all its successes and mistakes." Today, 4 months after my granddaughter's birth, things have found their place. Richard continues working at the pharmacies, but now as manager of the oldest one. He learned every detail of the business, knows every employee, every supplier. He implemented several of the modernizations he suggested, but with his feet on the ground, respecting the tradition and values that built everything. Patricia went back to school. She's doing a graduate degree in health management. She wants to help expand the pharmacy's service to underprivileged communities. Dr. Edward, surprisingly, has become an ally. His construction company is helping renovate some of the older pharmacies, and he even suggested a partnership to build a community clinic annexed to the main pharmacy. As for me, I'm finally enjoying the retirement I postponed for so long. I fish at Old Hickory Lake on weekends, play cards with my old friends on Wednesday afternoons. I tend to my garden and mainly spend hours and hours doting on my little granddaughter, telling her stories about my childhood in Millerville, about how her father was as a baby, about how her grandmother Martha would be proud of all of us. The will remains as it was, with 40% for Richard conditioned on working at the pharmacies, but that no longer matters to him. 2 weeks ago, he told me something that was worth more than all the millions. "Dad, even if you don't leave me a cent, you've already left me the greatest inheritance a son can receive, the example of an honest, hard-working man who never bowed to difficulties, and no one can take that away from me." Life has these ironies. It took a crisis, a threat of disinheritance to bring father and son closer. It took nearly losing everything to value what really matters. It took pain to give birth to wisdom. At this age, with white hair and hands calloused by the work of a lifetime, I learned that our true legacy is not in the material things we accumulate, but in the lives we touch, the values we transmit, the love we plant. If you've made it this far, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like. And if you really followed me to the end of this journey, comment below the word "New Beginning." Only those who watched will understand the meaning. Thank you to the Grandpa's Voice channel for this opportunity to share my story. Who knows, maybe the next one will be even more similar to yours. A tight hug from this old man here, who learned that it's never too late to regain what seemed lost.